Hi, my name is Kevin Wilson, and I'm the author of this novel, Run for the Hills. And I'm so honored and grateful to be included in the Great Reads program and to represent the state of Tennessee, which is where I was born, raised, and still live.
Eli Cranor here, author of Mississippi Blue 42.
I'm Jim Brown.
Hi there, my name is Ken Wells. I'm the author of Gumbo Life, Tales from the Roux Bayou.
Hi, I'm Todd Mildfelt, co-author of Abolitionist of the Most Dangerous Kind, James Montgomery and His War on Slavery.
Hi, I'm David D. Schafer, co-author of the book, and we're very delighted that our book was selected as one of 15 Kansas Notable Books for the year 2024. And we're very much honored that our book was selected as one of the Great Reads from Great Places books for this year.
Run for the Hills is a novel about a young woman, Mad, who lives on a small family-run farm in Tennessee, her and her mom. Her father left them when she was 10 years old and disappeared. And one day while working at the farm stand, this man shows up in a red PT Cruiser and informs her that his name is Reuben and he is her half-sister, that they share the same father, that in fact their father every 10 years leaves his family and starts a new one and completely changes his identity. And so Mad and Reuben head out into the western part of the United States to find their other half-siblings and to find and confront their father.
I'm Jim Brown. I came to Alabama, to Birmingham in 1971, having squeezed a 3-year PhD program in history at Vanderbilt into 5 years, and took a job teaching European and Asian history and occasionally folklore at Samford University. And I'd been to Alabama a grand total of twice before I came from my home in Tennessee. And either the newness of the culture and the environment, or maybe the age I was and the education that had opened some doors for me, everything was sort of brand new. And I spent those first 10 years exploring various natural history, folklore, local history topics with help from friends at Samford like Wayne Flint. And again, 40, 50 years later, went back and researched some of those 12 basic topics I had gotten into. Strange, archaic ways of fishing and singing and crafts and that sort of thing. So this is where the book got its start and finally came out in 2022. I saw Alabama through new eyes, a little bit, I guess, the way Stars Fell on Alabama author saw it back in the 1920s. I saw things I got interested in things that I would not have been interested back in my hometown. And I think if you are a newcomer to Alabama or would like to know something about the state, maybe this would introduce you to something. And even natives of Alabama, I hope it will introduce to a thing or two, maybe even a topic or two of Alabama natural history, folk history, things like that. The book is on 12 Alabama topics, but the book is not exclusively on Alabama. It's on how things I had studied in Russian history or European history or world history opened up to me, or activities I was getting into as a Boy Scout leader, taking hikes. Or the 12 topics are all focused on Alabama subjects, although the exploration of them is not exclusively on Alabama. It brings in things from the outside world, Egyptian pharaohs and the herpetology and salamander chapter, this sort of thing.
So I am a former collegiate quarterback / high school football coach. I played for one season over in Sweden. I've written 4 novels. Mississippi Blue 42 is my 4th novel. and it delves specifically into the big money world of college football. It's about a fictional federal investigation that, as an alternate history, kind of serves to where we are now with the NIL and payers getting payment. And I really hope that if people read this book, they not only get an idea about what this game means to America, but in a lot of ways how college football and football in general, a sport that is uniquely American, kind of mirrors our culture.
Basically, Gumbo Life is a social and cultural history of our most iconic soup. And the book really traces the origins of Gumbo from about 300 years ago to the present day, and investigates a number of mysteries, including who invented Gumbo and who gets credit for sort of taking Gumbo to the next level by adding the dark roux, which is now the predominant way that Gumbo is cooked. So there were some interesting mysteries involved in plumbing Gumbo life.
I spent 37 years teaching history and science. I always had a early interest in the Underground Railroad. I became interested in this project clear back in 2001 when I learned about an alleged massacre of pro-slave men reportedly in Franklin County. And the more I dug into that story was the more I uncovered secret societies, a group called the Danites that James Montgomery became part of. This group was actively working against the secret groups of the pro-slave forces known as Blue Lodges and Dark Lantern societies.
While Todd was busy teaching school, I was serving as a park ranger with the U.S. National Park Service, starting out at Fort Scott National Historic Site here in Kansas. And I worked at historic sites in Hawaii, Missouri, Puerto Rico, Oklahoma, and Texas, retired while working at Lyndon B. Johnson National Historical Park. And Todd and I have long had an interest in the era of Kansas territorial history, the Civil War, and in 2009, we decided to tackle the topic of James Montgomery based on a lot of Todd's research with the secret Danites.
Montgomery's journey started in Ohio, where he grew up as a young man. He moved to Kentucky, where he was married and started a family. He did not like living amongst enslavement in Kentucky because he felt it was unfair for him to have to compete against slave wages. Eventually, he moved his family to Missouri, and when the Kansas Territory opened in 1854, he took a claim in near Mound City, Kansas, where he finished out a cabin and began to make a life for he and his family there.
And Montgomery's important to note, he when he moved to Kansas, it became a battleground, the territory of Kansas, whether slavery would be extended into Kansas. So we had people moving in who wanted Kansas to be a free state, those who wanted it to be a slave state, and Montgomery got caught up in all the turmoil. And basically over time, he became radicalized, a very militant abolitionist who took up arms. He led the anti-slavery vigilantes known as the Jayhawkers, resisted the Fugitive Slave Act being enforced in Kansas. And it's really quite a story of how Montgomery became this radical militant abolitionist.
So Montgomery became swept up in the conflict known as Bleeding Kansas. He became a guerrilla militia captain. He and his wife Clorinda became part of the Underground Railroad in Southeast Kansas Territory. In 1858, he teamed up with John Brown in order to protect the border. John Brown worked with Montgomery, very close to Montgomery's claim, building an earthen fort as well as a couple of others in the area to protect against pro-slavery raiders.
And then Montgomery, as Todd was saying, got really swept up in all the turmoil of Bleeding Kansas and ended up leading an informal group known as the Jayhawkers, based in Sutherland County and also down into northern Bourbon County where Fort Scott was. And Montgomery actually led raids into Fort Scott at various times as Montgomery was in conflict with the U.S. District Court there. that would always rule against free state people and in favor of pro-slavery people and against the people of Fort Scott. So that whole era, very tough era in terms of so many of the things that happened that got us known as Bleeding Kansas, where 5 Free State men were killed, for instance, during the Meredith Massacre. Montgomery wanted to retaliate against that. So really dynamic, interesting figure that helped make Kansas become eventually a free state in January 1861.
After John Brown's execution, Montgomery teamed up with Secret Six member George L. Stearns. They came up with a secret plan to actually keep freedom seekers in Lynn County. Montgomery gave them the option of either moving north or remaining in Lynn County. The thought behind this was to publicly challenge the fugitive slave law and lead to further agitation on the slavery issue. It really was the beginning of the secession crisis at the end of December 1860 that rendered this secret plan a moot point.
So as Todd was saying, in the late 1850s on into 1860, James Montgomery, this guerrilla chieftain, was both admired and despised, depending on your perspective, as he became the strident anti-slavery warrior, basically. Now, when the Civil War came along in 1861 in the spring, within a few months, Montgomery became the leader of the 3rd Kansas Regiment, Colonel Montgomery, and as part of the Kansas Brigade, led by James H. Lane, that they made a series of expeditions into western Missouri, plundering farms, getting supplies, and very notably, helping enslaved people reach freedom in Kansas. This is well before the Emancipation Proclamation. And we found a wonderful interview with James Montgomery. Reporters from the New York Times in Missouri interviewed Montgomery in the fall of 1861, and Montgomery talked about his hope for a millennium at hand in which blacks would gain political and social equality with white men. And Montgomery had this to say about slavery. If our boys thought that this war had any other object than to give freedom to the slave, they would everyone go home tomorrow. James Montgomery, as a militant abolitionist, really believed that black men should serve as U.S. soldiers during the Civil War. Montgomery desperately wanted to lead African American soldiers, and he got that chance. In January 1863, in South Carolina, the Department of the South, based at Hilton Head, South Carolina, Montgomery took command of what became the 2nd South Carolina Infantry, later known as the 34th United States Colored Troops. And for 19 months, Montgomery led black soldiers in South Carolina and Georgia and Florida along the Union-controlled coasts of those states. And Montgomery had a chance to cooperate with Harriet Tubman on a raid up the Combahee River in South Carolina using steamboats that freed over 700 people. He led black soldiers at the siege of Morris Island and led 2 regiments of black soldiers at the Battle of Olustee in Florida, the biggest battle fought during the Civil War in Florida. And he served very competently. He made quite a mark with his anti-slavery fervor in the Department of the South. But due to ill health, he returned to Kansas in the summer of 1864.
In the summer of 1864, Montgomery became very ill, and he came back to Kansas to recuperate. He never actually did recover his health, so he never returned to duty. We believe that before Montgomery left Kansas in the fall of 1862, that he had arranged to employ black farm laborers on his farm to help do all of the farm work while he was gone. When he came back in August of 1864, he kind of picked things up there, but his health was and remained poor. So this story of using black laborers to keep Kansas farms going was being played out all across eastern Kansas, but it continued on the Montgomery's farm. And even during the time he was gone, it appears that some enterprising black men used that opportunity to find available land. And 2 of those men filed for early homestead claims. So as the war played out even when the war was over in April 1865, what remained was these black farm laborers remained an integral part of the Montgomery farm operation. And Montgomery will, like I said, never regain his health, but he's going to pass away in 1871. These black homesteading claims turned into some black clusters of black settlers, and on both sides of the Montgomery farm, black clusters sprang up. This will last far beyond Montgomery passing away in 1871 and Clorinda, who moved away from Kansas in 1875. I would like to see readers take away from our book something about the pioneer spirit in Kansas, both during its territorial days and as a result of the Civil War. And this pioneering spirit would be seen by the white settlers and also the black settlers that came to Kansas.
I hope readers will take away from our book a sense of James Montgomery's journey, the personal journey he took through the pages of history in Kansas, helping to end the extension of slavery into Kansas, and what he did during the Civil War, leading black soldiers. So what Todd and I wanted to do was not only to tell that very personal story of what Montgomery experienced, but to hitch it to the larger story of the abolitionist movement before the Civil War and the effort to arm black soldiers during the Civil War, and actually what happened after the Civil War when African-American families took up residence living near Montgomery family's farm there in Lynn County, Kansas.
So this is an interesting book for me because every book that I've ever written has been set in the state of Tennessee. It's the place where I'm from. It's the place that made me. And yet this is the first book where, although the book begins in Tennessee, it moves out to explore the rest of the country. And yet Mad, even as she finds these new family members, even as she learns more about her own history and the history of those around her, she never really forgets the solidity of Tennessee, the place where she's from.
I saw Alabama through new eyes, a little bit, I guess, the way Stars Fell on Alabama author saw it back in the 1920s. I saw things that I got interested in things that I would not have been interested back in my hometown. And I think if you are a newcomer to Alabama or would like to know something about the state, maybe this would introduce you to something. And even natives of Alabama, I hope it will introduce to a thing or two, maybe even a topic or two of Alabama natural history, folk history, things like that.
I think Mississippi Blue 42 connects to Arkansas, which is where I'm from. I'm repping my Razorbacks jersey. I'm actually coming to you from New York. I'm at the tail end of a book tour right now. It relates to Arkansas in a lot of ways, mainly because a state like Arkansas or Mississippi, we don't have professional teams. It's the biggest thing we've got going is college football. And specifically in the book, the lead rookie FBI agent, the lead character, Ray Johnson, her father is a big-time football coach in Arkansas.
So Gumbo was invented like jazz was invented in Louisiana, and Gumbo really is the story of jazz written in food. And we know that the first recorded record of Gumbo goes back to 1764, and for a long, long time, people thought the Cajuns, who are the French Acadians who came in the 1760s, had invented Gumbo. But of course, this recipe revealed that the primal version of Gumbo was being cooked in the New Orleans French Quarter by people of color, the people that we now know as Creoles. So that was actually quite a shock to Gumbo world, this revelation. But in retrospect, it made sense because the Africans who came as enslaved people beginning in 1719 came with generations old recipes for spicy okra and rice stews that they cooked in the motherland. Mostly West Africa is where they came from. And if you look at the early iterations of Gumbo For example, in the 1901 Creole cookbook, there are 9 recipes, only 2 have the roux. So it's kind of clear that primal gumbos were pretty much the African template, and that began to change. We think, in the middle 1800s when the Cajuns entered the picture. So it's a rather complicated tale, but it's an interesting one.
This is a Kansas story. Dave and I grew up in Richmond, Kansas, a small town in Franklin County. In fact, where we grew up was only about 3 to 4 miles away from where John Brown hid 11 freedom seekers in December 1858. So we have close ties to this story. This is really a grassroots Kansas story, and I feel that this was at a critical juncture in U.S. history at a time when what happened in Kansas would occupy national significance.
As Todd was saying, we both grew up in a small town of Richmond, Kansas, and I followed Todd to Pittsburgh State University, where we both majored in history, and we both studied under Dr. Dudley Taylor Cornish there at Pittsburgh State. Dr. Cornish published a book called The Sable Arm, Black Union Troops During the Civil War. And I would say he influenced both of us, and we even dedicated our book to Dudley Cornish. So we're native Kansans, and also, of course, Montgomery, and a notable figure in the early days of Kansas history. You mentioned John Brown. John Brown stayed overnight at the Montgomery cabin. So Montgomery, an important figure in the early days of Kansas history, who we feel had not really gotten the attention that he deserves.
One of the things that my novels always explore is just the idea of family, what it means to be connected to other people. And I hope that when people read Run for the Hills, they get a sense of what it means not just to be a biological family, but to find each other, to be a found family as well. And even though they don't fully know each other, what does it mean to try to learn about another person, to hold on to them because you can see some part of yourself in them, and how you can be stronger if you hold on to other people? Now, one of the things that the National Book Festival is doing is the catchphrase is uniting book lovers for 25 years. And one of the things that I've always found is the power of a book to bring people together. And I think I'll draw on my most recent example, which is I have 2 young boys, one's 17 and one is 12, and we still read to them every night. And at first, when they were very, very little, it was just this kind of lovely way to get ready for the end of the day, to share a book together and to explore those worlds. But now, as they get older and older, there's so many ways where they're becoming their own person, and they're about to set off on a journey where they discover who they really are. And there are times when it's difficult to get them to talk or to open up or share. And that little amount of time, 30 minutes at night, where we're reading a book together is one of the times when I feel closest to them. And it doesn't just remind me of their childhood and who I was when they were young, but it also kind of affirms that connection that we have with each other. So if we didn't have books, I don't know where I'd get that feeling.
Well, the obvious thing is that people read about the same topic and they share that information and they share that interest. But I think there's a deeper way books connect people. Recently, I've read a couple of novels that are from different corners of the world. Theo of Golden, set in some middle Georgia river town. And then there's one called The Second Chance Convenience Store, set in a wealthy suburb in Seoul, Korea, written by a Korean author. And both of these books open up human nature to you in a way that no other medium can do. And I find myself, it's not that they believe universal nature is humanly good. There are some vile characters in both books, but there is a basic goodness in most people, and those books show you how to get at it. And I, as a reader of those 2 books, so different on the surface, I come away wanting to approach people in a whole new way. I want more open to people, more interested in their background and how it made them. And I think if it works on everybody like that, like it works on me, which I think it does, that is one great thing books do for us all, just to bring us together.
How have my books, like how have I experienced how books bring people together? Specifically as a guy who was heavily involved in sports, it was always cool, you know, if we're on the team bus or on a flight somewhere to an away game, to see other guys with books. And I still feel that way because men don't generally read as much as women. I mean, that's just in our marketing numbers. We know that when we're writing a novel, that it's going to be a harder sell for guys. So I always feel like when I see another guy with a book in his hand, then man, like there's a guy that I have something that I can relate to, something I could talk about.
Well, gumbo is probably the original communal dish, in Louisiana. Nobody cooks gumbo for one person. It's not that kind of dish. People, since the 1760s have been gathering in groups of 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 12 to eat gumbo, and of course then to discuss the affairs of the day and what's happened. And that's still true. In colonial Louisiana, among Creoles and Cajuns, big families were predominant because the family was the labor unit. You had a lot of kids to work on the farm and to work the fields and that sort of stuff. And so they had big families. And of course, gumbo made with readily available and certainly at the time inexpensive ingredients. You caught shrimp from the bayou, flour, oil, and then of course served over rice. It goes a long way in feeding these large families, and that's not much changed. When I get together with friends over gumbo, there's usually 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 of us, and the argument, of course, is always who makes the best gumbo, whose gumbo is the best, and there's only one good answer, and that's Mama.
Well, one of the reasons we research and write about people of the past is to hopefully learn some lessons we can apply to our lives today. And one of the things about James Montgomery, his life does show examples of interracial cooperation. It required the efforts of many, many people, both white and black, white men and women, black men and women, to bring about the end of slavery. And in today's very polarized society, it's pretty remarkable to find out about the cooperation of people involved in the Underground Railroad, both black and white, to help freedom seekers, in our case, fugitives from the Indian Territory of Missouri and Arkansas getting to Kansas, or the alliance between white officers and black soldiers during the Civil War. So despite all the conflict and turmoil and violence of that era, Montgomery was a very controversial character in many ways. I think there are stories from the past, as Todd and I researched and wrote about in this book, that can have parallels or comparisons to our lives today here in the 21st century.
I'm an academic. I professed history for 45 years. And there is a real dichotomy in the American world between the world of the intellectuals and the world of the folk. And it's unfortunate. I know in my own world, we ivory tower intellectuals tend not to value manual labor the way we should. I went down to a state park to camp out for an art show down in middle Alabama. And the people there had these fancy pickup trucks dragging 45-foot trailers that I could never ever drag. I can't name you 1 in 20 academics who would run such a rig, and yet we have no appreciation for it. And then on the other hand, you got folks who think about college as being hoity-toity and why would you ever want to go? And so I'm not sure I'm good at it, but I fancy myself in the role of interpreter between the folk and the intellectuals. It's 2 different languages, and both sides ought to appreciate the other a little more.
how does my work bring people together? I think my work specifically deals with Arkansas and the South in general. I think it's tackled everything from high school football with my first novel to kind of a class struggle with my second one, chicken processing with my third, and now again college football. So big things that if you're of the South, if you're of that culture, then you understand.
Well, I think one of the issues, in Louisiana is our sense of pride and, a gradual understanding, which was not always appreciated, of how we, fit as a peculiar place in the American landscape. There simply is no place like us in terms of, food and music and that kind of culture. And I think to some extent, a book like Gumbo Life, delving in the history of that, sort of brings forward the notion that we have a lot to be proud about. We've done these things, we've created these things. Gumbo, began as a peasant soup in colonial, long ago, colonial Cajun and Creole kitchens, and it's now conquered the world. I mean, you can go to Tokyo and get gumbo. I mean, John Foss has cooked it all over the world. Paul Prudhomme spread what I call the gumbo diaspora, all over America. There was a moment in New York City where his gumbo food truck was the hottest thing in New York City, and the Board of Health wanted to shut it down, and the mayor himself came forward and said, "No, this is we have to have this stuff." So I think that to some extent, there's this feeling that gumbo is just another example of a culture that has produced something both unique and beautiful and delicious, and has sort of conquered the world.
I think our story has the power to bring people together because good stories bring people together, and this is a great story. I think it has a lot of potential for uniting people because of the spirit of interracial cooperation. It's evident in the Underground Railroad. It's evident by black farm laborers keeping Kansas farms going, and black refugees becoming black soldiers and contributing to the war effort in that way.
I like to write in the morning, so I'll disappear from the house by 8:30 and go hole up in some little corner upstairs of the Sanford Library and take my big cup of coffee up there and spend 2, 3, 3.5 hours in the mornings. That seems to be when the muse works for me. Probably different for everybody. And then I have to go over my writing a dozen times for corrections or additions or augmentations or explanations. In fact, when I read my book that's up, I think maybe I should have gone over it one more time for overworked phrases and a couple of questionable factual calls. But it's a really enjoyable, mostly enjoyable, occasionally frustrating when it doesn't come out right, but a mostly enjoyable morning process for me. I'm just really proud to be in a country with an institution that celebrates books. And back when I was doing my dissertation in another world, I researched in the Library of Congress. And I am so appreciative of the people that work there and all that's being done there, including this 25-year-old Festival of the Book. I'm still, I guess, an old timer enough. I love the physical book in hand, turning the physical pages, flipping to the back to look at the footnotes. So thanks to everybody who had a part in this.
Well, when I'm often asked to speak to college classes and kids about writing, and what I always tell them is writing is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. My breakthrough as a writer was not composition. It was not that I suddenly discovered a style. I seemed by the time I was in fourth grade to be able to write a clear declarative sentence. What I was lazy. I did not have the sense that to write a long form book, what you really need to do is, as Hemingway said, ass in chair. You need discipline. And that was the big breakthrough for me. The realization that, if you're going to do this and you're going to be serious about it, you have to learn to write on a schedule. And you also have to learn not to be picky about the first drafts, of your book. It's far better. I write what I call the ugly version of all my books, all my chapters, and that's just getting it down on paper. Because let's just say you don't have to write every day, I don't think, but you have to write 3 or 4 days a week. And let's just say you're writing 4 days a week. It's so much better at the end of those 4 days to end up with 35 what I call ugly pages than one beautiful, perfect page, because the 1 page a month is not going to get you anywhere, but the 35 pages can be revised. You can add on to that. And if you to that kind of schedule and you continue to write, at the end of some certain time, you'll actually have a manuscript. It won't be pretty. The first draft is never pretty, but then it's so much easier in my mind to go back and revise stuff instead of just creating from whole cloth. So that's my basic process. It's just learning that I have to sit there and do the work.
My writing process is one of my favorite things. As an old coach and former player, I take a lot of pride in always trying to hone my process. So I get up at 5 every morning. I've got 2 kids. I write from 5 to 7, and that's kind of like the sacred time. And my only other real rule is when I start a draft, I try to do everything I can not to miss a day, because those days build up. I usually get about 1,000 words in the morning, and then after about 80 to 100 days in a row, I can have an 80 to 100,000 word manuscript, and that's a first draft, which, as we all know, the fun's just getting started. Thank y'all.
I think one of the most important aspects of our writing process was the length of time it took to finally complete the book. And while we were not okay with that length of time, it actually helped make a better book as we continued to research and learn more. And one thing that I've learned through the writing process is to come up with rough drafts of points that you feel are very valid, and come back to the sources, come back to some of the writings of these people involved, and let that kind of soak in. You talk to other people about it, and you kind of all distill it down into what really becomes the most important concepts of what you're trying to get across.
Well, as Todd was saying, it took us quite a while to research and write this book, from the initial idea to the final book being published by the University of Oklahoma Press. 14 years went by. So we really want to thank the support and patience of our wives, especially Kelly and Valerie, respectively. And I think it was very valuable to have co-writers on such a project, because we could each delve into specific research. We each took the lead on drafting specific chapters, and we could share the ideas back and forth. And we shared many phone calls and emails back and forth over the years to finally get to the final product. But I would say, wouldn't you, Todd, it's a much better book as a collaborative effort than if each of us would have just tackled it alone.
Definitely.